Okay, so we're looking at Deixis, and this is based upon the chapter 2 in Grundy and the 3 or 4 pages from Archer et al. So let's just take an overview of what we're going to do here. First, we're going to talk about the notions of reference, indexicality, and Deixis. We'll look at deictic and non-deictic uses amongst a couple of deictic terms. We'll talk a bit about what Deixis is in terms of a type or a class of particular words. Then we'll look at the different types of Deixis. We've got 6: person Deixis, and then from that, social Deixis or honorifics, place Deixis, time Deixis, and then discourse and text Deixis, which uses both time and place Deixis, and then finally emphatic Deixis. And then we'll talk more about the notion of deictic center, and we'll finish off with a couple of things about invariant meaning versus variable reference. And last notion we'll look at is deferred reference. Okay, so if we look at these two particular words, come in and go in, they encapsulate a particular deictic center. So if you can look at the first one, the woman's opening the door and she's saying, come in. So the deictic center is the particular woman inside the house, and she's beckoning the person outside to come in to her deictic center. If we look at the other one, and we're outside of the house, and we use the word go in, right? So the deictic center here is shifting not from the speaker, but to the house itself, right? So maybe the speaker's staying out of the house, but the visitor's going in. So this is the notion of the deictic center and how the deictic center can shift. If we go back to that first picture, we can also the woman can also say, go in. So what does that mean? So think about the deictic center shifting. So she's shifting the deictic center away from herself onto the particular inside of that room. Maybe the person, the visitor, is going through to another room in the house to visit somebody there. Or maybe the woman is going outside of the house, and so she won't be inside it. So we could use go in there to shift. Notice a shift in the deictic center. Similarly, if you're outside of the house and you say to your visitor, come in, well, again, the deictic center has been shifted to inside the house, and signaling perhaps that's where you're going to go as well. So what we talked about there is a notion of deixis and the deictic center, and how that center can shift based upon the particular reference of the particular utterance. When we talk about reference, we can talk about the notion of indexicality. So indexicality is the ability of signs to point to something. So we have an index finger, which we use for pointing. So in the world, in the area of semiotics, there are lots of things which point to things. They're indexes. In language, the words we use to encode indexicality are called deictics, deictic terms. And this is the notion of the relation of the reference to the point and origin of the utterance. Okay? So you're particular uttering something and referring to something. And so these terms, these deictic terms, words and expressions, point to people, places, and time. And as we'll see, a couple of other things as well. We have to distinguish between deictic and non-deictic uses. Deictic terms are not always deictic. So, for example, if you take the second person you, we can look at it in terms of its deictic use. And when we talk about deictic use in terms of person deixis, we can talk about symbolic reference. So therefore, it can refer to either you, meaning one person, or a group of people. And we could also have what we call gestural deixis, and this is not as common, of course, as symbolic deixis. Gestural deixis, where you combine an actual non-linguistic pointing or gesture you, and you. And that's going with a pointing, and that's gestural. Okay, that particular pronoun, though, a second person pronoun, can have a non-deictic use. And that's when it's not picking out any particular reference, whether one person or several people, but it's a general reference. So you never know. It's not really referring to the one person or a group of people. It's a general particular reference. And if I can sing this song, which I can't, but I'll attempt to, you always lose the one you love, the one you shouldn't hurt at all. I should think it'd be, you should always hurt the one you love, the one you should never hurt at all. Well, it's not you, and it's not you. It's everyone. It's a kind of a general use. And so in that sense, it's non-deictic. Here's another example of non-deictic use, and this is the deictic term last, which can also which can mean previous in a deictic sense, or it can be non-deictic in the sense of final. So how long ago did the last bus leave? So here, in a deictic meaning, it would be the previous or the most recent bus. But imagine that there is a non-deictic final bus, the last bus of the evening, right? It always leaves at 11:30, okay? The last bus leaves at 11:30. There won't be another bus until 5:30 in the morning. So it's the last bus. So that is non-deictic. It's the final scheduled bus. If we look at the words that constitute deictic terms, deictic types, what we find is they're a very closed class, a very limited set of indexical expressions. And they tend to be to do with person reference, place reference, and time reference. And we'll see some other references as well, some other use of deictics. And in terms of function, of course, it's very useful to have a limited set of expressions whose reference is determined in face-to-face interaction, and which can be used for an infinite number of descriptions. So imagine if you had to have a different word according to different contexts. It would be unmanageable. So this is a very useful close set of words which respond to context. It can only be worked out in context. Okay, so let's have a look at the different deictic types. And so first one is person deixis, and this is references to I, you, he, she, we, and they. There are complications, of course, with the use of I. And I, in some languages, there may be different I's, which refer to different types of people, different genders, for example. In English, it's pretty straightforward. But the term we in English often can mean you. So think about this as being the teacher or a parent talking to Joe, poor old Joe. We didn't do very well on the test, did we, Joe? Well, I mean, it's not the speaker who didn't do well on the test, it's Joe, but there's a certain kind of way that we can empathize with Joe by using we, a kind of an inclusive sense of we, but of course it's referring to you. With the word we, of course, we have two meanings in English, and often these, in other languages, Indonesian for example, we can have two types of we to express inclusive we and exclusive we. So a student talking to a student says, what are we supposed to do? That's inclusive we. The speaker and the addressee are part of the we. But what if the student's speaking to the teacher? Then it's exclusive. What are we supposed to do, Professor? Well, the we there does not include the teacher because the teacher doesn't have to do the homework, for example. Usually with he, she, and it, they're used more anaphorically than deictically. And just to conclude this slide, to make a distinction here between person deixis and social deixis. In person deixis, we address our equals, okay, or our inferiors. And we refer to our superiors, and that's how we use honorifics. So if you think in terms of languages that have a casual or intimate you as opposed to a formal you, as a marker of respect and distance. In English, we don't have that. We used to have it. It used to be thou was the informal and you was the formal. But we don't mark that in English anymore. But in other languages, we do. In other languages, Italian, for example, you might refer to the person you're speaking to as they or he or she. And so what you're doing is you're using that as a mark of respect, of distance, of politeness. So that's a distinction we're making there between addressing equals and referring to superiors. If we look at social deixis, then what it refers to is the way that social identities and relationships between speakers and addressees are encoded by the use of these particular terms. We can distinguish between absolute honorifics, and these don't really change according to context. But of course, there are most of these honorifics are relational, and so they do change according to context. Sir, madam, gentleman, lady is used in particular contexts, but not all. Boy, girl, man, woman, guys, folks. Terms of endearment, and who can use these and in what situations. Hun, short for honey, dear, pal, sweetie. In British English, you can use love as another term for hun, which is kind of interesting when you go to Britain for the first time and people refer to you as love. And so this is the way of encoding relationships, and we talk about these as being honorifics and a type of social deixis. Next kind of deixis is place deixis. We can make a distinction here and distinguish non-deictic terms from deictic terms. So in terms of place and directions, we have absolute or cardinal directions, north, east, south, west. We have intrinsic particular descriptions. Michelle is standing on President Obama's left. So she's always standing on President Obama's left, whichever way you look at it. So what we're getting at is relative to the speaker. And so here we use deictic terms. So Amina is hiding behind a tree. Of course, a tree doesn't have a front and the back. It depends upon where you're standing in relationship to the tree and Amina, whether she's behind it or not. The next kind of deixis is time deixis. So all these terms, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, summer, winter, for example, are deictic terms. Yesterday, today, tomorrow, now, then. It's interesting, of course, that we use these particular words depending on particular context. So if I said, when does a year begin and end, it's not a simple answer. It depends how you constitute a year. So if you're saying to a student, I hope you're going to do well this year, we're referring to an academic year. Notice also how we can have variable reference to the word today. Today is always a bad day, refers to a particular day. We don't know which one. Maybe it's Tuesday, maybe it's Wednesday, maybe it's Friday. I will get it later today. So when does today end? And when does it? It's not necessarily midnight, because it could be in an office situation. It could be the end of the day is 5 or 6 o'clock. I want it today, not tomorrow. Is that up to midnight or when? The next kind of deixis is discourse or text deixis, and this refers to the way we were referred backwards and forwards in a text. Of course, we do refer backwards and forwards anaphorically and cataphorically, but that's not what we're looking at here in terms of deixis. Anaphoric and cataphoric reference picks out a particular linguistic item. But here it's not quite clear what is being referred to, the stretch of discourse that's being referred to. So that was an amazing story, referring to a whole of a particular story or a whole of a particular discourse. I bet you haven't heard this story, so we're referring to the upcoming story. And that's all I know. That is everything you've just told me. As mentioned above, is using place deixis in terms of a paper. I will discuss this in more detail later in the paper using time deixis to talk about the um, a paper in terms of what is to come. And then even kind of words like besides, she's a very good driver. Besides is often interpreted as being also, but it's actually more than also. It is also, what is it's suggesting is that there's a second argument which is going to accompany a previous argument. So, for example, I might be talking to my wife about the fact that whether we should let our daughter drive to Knoxville, Tennessee, and I might say, well, she is 21, so she's old enough to decide herself. Besides, she's a very good driver. Let's not worry about it. Okay, so the second their argument, the second argument is she's a good driver, very good driver, is bolstering or even being a stronger argument than the previous argument I've used. So besides is actually referring to a previous argument. Emphatic Deixis, classic one of these was, of course, Bill Clinton, when he was accused of having sex with his intern, Monica Lewinsky. And he said, I did not have sex with that woman. What do you mean, that woman? So this is the use of a distal demonstrative, distal in the fact is distal is far away, to actually convey some kind of emotional distance. So if you move from the proximal these to the distal that, those, you're creating emotional distance. If you move the other way and you go from distal to proximal, this and these, you're actually encoding empathy. Okay, so those are the six main categories of deixis that we use. I just want to talk a little bit about deictic center. We've discussed this a little bit when we looked at place deixis, and we made that distinction between absolute and intrinsic and contrasted that with deictic terms. So look at the shifting deictic center in this particular use here. So coming from Columbus, OU is on the right of 33, but coming from Pomeroy, it's on the left. Okay, so what we're suggesting is a different deictic center which generates the particular reference. How about back in 10 minutes? It's an annoying sign you might find on your professor's door. So, well, in terms of the professor's deictic center, well, okay, fine. We don't know when that is going to be. In terms of the student who arrives outside the door, they know very well when their deictic center is. It begins now, but they don't know how long ago the professor left. So we have different deictic centers in terms of interpreting what is meant by back in 10 minutes. Grundy discusses a very interesting way that the way we can report speech can show a shifting deictic center. So if you take the first one here, why don't you want to come to the cinema with me, Eleanor? The deictic center is very much in the with the speaker, right? And the choice of come, etc. Look at the second one. So maybe this is from a script. Eleanor. Eddie said, why don't you want to come to the cinema with me, Eleanor? Okay. So notice the deictic center is still with Eddie because this is what Eddie said, but it's shifting ever so much, a little bit towards Eleanor. And then take the next one. Eddie asked why I didn't want to come to the cinema with him. It's clearly the deictic center is now with Eleanor, with the speaker, not with Eddie. And it probably shifts even more to the speaker in the last one, which has an attitudinal reporting verb, complain. So Eddie complained that I didn't want to go to the cinema with him. Okay, notice the go right there as well. So there, clearly the deictic center has shifted completely to Eleanor or to the speaker, away from Eddie. Two final slides, just two are concepts here, the notion of invariant meaning and variable reference. So Deixis refers to variable reference, okay? But of course, we use that in together with invariant meaning. So if you take these words here, has a particular invariant meaning, which is the region immediate to you, right? The region or place immediate to you. And now is the time immediate to this utterance. So you can say that they have invariant meaning. You could say they have semantic meaning. But what do they actually mean in terms of pragmatic meaning? And that's the variable reference. Okay. So these propositional meanings don't change, but the time or place picked out shifts according to the context. So here's a really neat piece of advertising for this very nice car that I would like to drive around Athens. The car you saw today and intend to buy tomorrow, somebody saw yesterday and intends to buy today. Wow. Lots of variable reference there, depending on the time that you're reading that and seeing that. Finally, let's look at the notion of deferred reference. And this really refers to the fact that, well, we don't have a one-to-one deictic reference. What is indicated needs to be interpreted. So it's not a one-to-one reference. So if you point to a bottle of wine, or you're holding up a bottle of wine, and you say, these are on special offer at the supermarket, right? The reference is not to the one bottle, but to a large group of bottles, right? And this is the notion of deferred reference. So the deictic index must first be identified and then instantiated into a reference. So what you're trying to do is make a calculation. What is being referred to when the person says these, right? When quite clearly it's not referring to one bottle, it has to be referring to a group of bottles. Okay, that's it for Deixis.